Hello, my name is Vanessa Davila, and today I'll be doing the journal number 2 over vision and perception. Okay, so in today's video, we'll be covering understanding of sight, how we see, neurobiological account of vision, and the color perception and its history. Okay, so the first topic is our understanding of sight. So let's talk about Virgil and here we go. Let's talk about Virgil. So who is Virgil? So Virgil is seen in the chapter of To See or Not to See by Oliver Sacks. And Sacks looks into a patient by the name of Virgil. And Virgil is a man who was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, and he had thick cataracts in his eyes. Now, retinitis pigmentosa is a hereditary condition that slowly but implacably eats away at the retinas. So at a young age, Virgil was unable to see well, and at the age of 3, he suffered a triple illness of meningitis, polio, and cat scratch fever. This caused him to have convulsions and to become blind and paralyzed in the legs and partly paralyzed in his breathing. After about 10 days, he was in a coma for 2 weeks. And once he woke up, his mother said that he seemed to be a different person when he woke up. He was kind of dull. He wasn't the rambunctious and spunky and mischievous boy that he used to be. Eventually, the strength did come back in his legs and chest, and his eyesight did recover, but he had retina damage. He was eventually sent to a blind school where he read Braille and walked with a cane. So he essentially learned to live as a blind person. He became a massage therapist later in his life at age 20, where he worked at the YMCA, and he loved to listen to audiobooks. He loved to listen to the radio for sports such as baseball, and he was really close to his mom, and he eventually was engaged to his wife, now Amy, in 1991. Virgil seemed to live a pretty dull life, and their marriage with Amy was pretty dull as well, and she thought that restoring his sight might help create less dullness in their marriage. So she sought after many doctors. One doctor named Hamlin didn't think that he had retinitis pigmentosa because Virgil was able to see light and dark shadows move in front of him, and he believed that just a simple cataract surgery would be able to restore his vision. So they went through with that procedure, and he did get his sight back. So unfortunately, there were some problems with Virgil's sight. Not in the sense of the biological vision itself, but rather the psychological and the neurobiological senses behind it. He had trouble adjusting to being able to see. He didn't really trust things going on around him without a cane or without being able to touch things. Also, this led to a lot of questions from Sacks that he brought up, which was what vision is like as a blind person regaining their vision, and could someone distinguish things with sight before touch? Right, so we see that Locke had wrote something earlier about a blind person regaining sight, and he said that no, because the connection between tactile world and sight world, that connection is only established on a basis of experience. So he would have to have experience in order to be able to fully gain his sight. Okay, so Virgil and understanding vision. So that was the background about Virgil. Let's talk about the understanding of vision. So he was able to see, but he was unable to comprehend exactly what he was seeing. So there were simple things, but that's simple things to us, and we've been able to see since birth, right? He has not been able to see since he was a young boy. So, for example, when they took the bandages off of his eyes after surgery, he didn't know what he was looking at, who he was looking at, like what his surroundings were. Only when the doctor said, well, was he able to perceive, oh, this is my surgeon, this is my doctor, this is what a human looks like. So he felt that he had to touch things also, which was a major problem. He didn't trust, like, this is a cup. He had to feel it and look at it in order to associate this is a cup. He was only able to begin to identify things in the world after repetition of exposure into the world and experience. And even after that, there would be incidences of where he would get tired vision. And when he'd get tired, his vision would get blurry. And he would often revert back to tactics that he used when he was blind, such as eating a salad. At first, he'd start eating it with his fork, being very precise in his movements. Eventually, he would move into blurry vision, less precise movements, and got rid of the fork and just used his hands to feel his surroundings. So he felt honestly more impaired being able to see than when he was blind. And that's because he so heavily relied on touch, and he's so used to that through the years. He's been doing that since he was a little boy, and it's been 50 years since then. So Virgil's eyesight eventually declined throughout his years. This was due to a number of illnesses, and also his weight was a major problem as well. That didn't really help with the contribution of the illnesses he picked up. So technically, in a practical sense, towards the end of Virgil's life, he was diagnosed with being fully blind, pretty much. But interestingly enough, the eye doctor wanted to see how Virgil's retinas looked, and they looked exactly the same as they did after his surgery at the very beginning of his journey of sight. The only thing that was different is when there was light that came into view, electrically, there was nothing happening in the retinas in the brain. So there wasn't any brain activity connected with the retinas. So this shows that the impact of the psyche really has a major influence on the body's functions, right? So Virgil had always felt out of place when he had vision, when he was able to see. And when that was restored, he still heavily relied on touch. And when he'd go through extreme emotional disruptions, he'd have his sight impaired. So there's a lot of things to do mentally and emotionally that impact your biology, your biological processes, such as your vision. And we can see that through Virgil. There was much confusion from Virgil's wife and his family, and even Sachs that we see in this chapter, into his condition as to why can Virgil biologically see with his vision, but somehow his psyche is having trouble, which causes his vision to have trouble, which causes him to feel like he is blind and he can't see. So through the confusion and the frustrations, we're able to see through Virgil's family. It also shows our shallow perspective of vision as only amounting to understanding the world through our sight, our sense of sight and having eyes. However, Virgil proves to us that sight can be shown not only in the physical sense of biologically being able to see, but through touch, when he was able to move freely in the world and just be comfortable, even if his eyes were shut, such as when he was performing his job as a masseuse. Okay, so number 2, how do we see? So we're able to see biologically when we are born. From that young age, we learn to associate objects that we perceive with our eyes to holding meaning, having value, and eventually we're able to have recognition of those things in the world. This is not the case with Virgil, because for so many years he's relied only on touch as his sense of sight, right? That's his way of perceiving the world. But he has to kind of relearn that experience. So in this sense, sight isn't necessarily something that's biologically just picked up like that. It's more something that we learn throughout our years. Number 3, we're going to talk about neurobiological account of vision. So the account of vision that Virgil shows, the neurobiological aspect of that only looks at the retina, right? And the processes in the brain and the connection with the retina and the electrical signals in the brain that fire when our eyesight works properly. But it doesn't account for our experiences, nor does it account for our emotional and psychological impacts that alter our biological workings. Like I said previously in this video, Virgil has a heavy reliance on touch, so psychologically, he reverts back to touch, and that's his way of seeing. And honestly, it impacts his biological processes. So, sight isn't just being able to see with your eyes, it's much more than that. So, we're going to talk about a podcast that talked about color perception and its history. So, it talked about how color perception is actually very subjective rather than objective, and we see this subjectivity in a numerous amount of species examples. So for example, humans have 3 cone receptors where we're allowed to see reds, orange, yellows, greens, blues, and purples in the rainbow. However, some species like butterflies, they have more receptors than us, about 5 to 6. So they're able to see more colors in the rainbow than we do, more depth, right? And sparrows have that ultraviolet vision compared to humans, so they're able to see more because they have the ultraviolet at the top of the rainbow, and then they see our colors, and then they're able to see more hues and depths of red towards the end of the rainbow. Also in women, there's sometimes on the XX chromosome, you can have a development of a 4th cone for yellows where we see more depth and perceptions of yellows rather than a normal human with normal sight. So with these examples, it just goes to show how different every person's and animal's experience of color is. Also, in the podcast, color perception in history was discussed, where the term blue hardly ever, if ever, came up anciently in language and in ancient accounts. It's never really mentioned until the ancient Egyptians, where they developed things that were blue. This could be because there were not many things in nature that are blue, and the only way that blue could be recognized was through a categorization. So there were examples of when people would see blue, they could see blue, it was there, but they kind of glazed over it and they didn't really recognize it and perceive it. They just kind of skipped over it, right? But through a categorization of the color and the term blue, now we're able to perceive, oh, that object over there is blue. So this is a great example. This color perception is a great example of the meaning really of perception. So although we are physically able to see with our eyes, there are things that we can perceptually miss or perhaps glaze over just because we don't have categories for them. Just because we see doesn't mean that we absorb and retain and are able to recognize the things in our world. There could be so many things that we're missing, right? And it's just perception. It's subjective. Thank you so much for watching.